Have you ever found yourself staring blankly at your phone, too exhausted to even scroll? Or perhaps you've canceled plans with friends, not because you lack time, but because you simply lack the energy to engage? What if I told you that this isn't just ordinary fatigue? That deeper than physical tiredness lies something more profound: emotional exhaustion, a state the ancient Stoics recognized thousands of years before our modern burnout epidemic. Today, I'm going to share 5 critical signs that you're not just tired, but emotionally drained, and how the wisdom of Stoic philosophy can help you reclaim your inner strength. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Before we dive in, if you're new here, we explore ancient wisdom for modern challenges, finding timeless solutions to today's problems. I want to start with a personal story. 3 years ago, I was working 60-hour weeks, constantly responding to emails and trying to maintain relationships and hobbies. I thought I was just tired, just needed more coffee, just needed to power through. But one morning, I found myself sitting in my car in the parking lot, unable to summon the energy to walk into the office. It wasn't physical exhaustion. My body was fine. It was something deeper. My emotional reserves had been completely depleted. This experience led me down a path of discovery, particularly to Stoic philosophy, which offers profound insights into managing our emotional energy. The Stoics, philosophers like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, lived in turbulent times not unlike our own. They developed practical wisdom for maintaining inner calm and emotional resilience amid chaos. Their teachings are remarkably relevant for understanding emotional exhaustion today. So let's explore 5 signs that you're emotionally exhausted, paired with Stoic wisdom to help you recover. The first sign of emotional exhaustion is when minor tasks feel monumental. Remember when clearing your inbox or preparing dinner felt manageable? When emotionally exhausted, these ordinary tasks can feel like climbing mountains. I experienced this when even deciding what to eat for lunch became strangely paralyzing. This overwhelming feeling towards small things is a key indicator that your emotional resources are depleted. The cognitive burden of depletion. This phenomenon is rooted in what psychologists call decision fatigue. As our emotional energy reserves diminish, our capacity to make even simple choices deteriorates. The brain, already taxed by stress or prolonged emotional strain, begins to register everyday decisions as threatening or overwhelming. Consider how a well-rested mind might approach organizing a closet, methodical, perhaps even enjoyable. But when emotionally exhausted, the same task transforms into a series of impossible decisions: what to keep, where to put things, how to begin. Each one requiring energy you simply don't have. Physical manifestations. Emotional exhaustion doesn't just live in your mind, it manifests physically. You might notice a heaviness in your limbs when facing routine chores, unusual fatigue after minimal exertion, tension headaches or muscle pain when confronting tasks, disrupted sleep patterns despite feeling constantly tired. These physical symptoms create a feedback loop, further depleting your resources and making even basic self-care feel insurmountable. Stoic insight. Epictetus, a former slave who became one of Rome's great Stoic teachers, offered this wisdom. It is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them. This profound insight reveals something crucial about emotional exhaustion. It's not necessarily the tasks themselves that drain us, but our perception of them. When our emotional reserves are low, our judgment becomes impaired, and we catastrophize small challenges. The Stoics taught that while we cannot control external events, we can control our response to them. They practiced focusing exclusively on what lies within their control, their perceptions, intentions, and actions. When everything feels overwhelming, Try this stoic practice. Pause and ask yourself, what aspect of this situation can I influence? Then direct your limited energy only toward that element. By focusing on what you can control rather than everything demanding your attention, you reduce the psychological burden and preserve your emotional energy. The second sign is particularly troubling. When activities that once energized you now leave you feeling empty. Perhaps you were once passionate about cooking, painting, or hiking, but now these activities feel like obligations rather than sources of joy. This emotional flatness, what psychologists call anhedonia, is a classic symptom of emotional depletion. I noticed this when my photography, once a source of creative fulfillment, started feeling like another task on my to-do list. The camera gathered dust for months as I couldn't summon the emotional energy to engage with something that had previously brought me so much happiness. The neurological basis of lost joy. This phenomenon has deep neurobiological roots. Chronic stress and emotional overload disrupt the brain's reward circuitry, particularly affecting dopamine pathways that regulate motivation and pleasure. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for focus and appreciation of complex experiences, becomes impaired when we're emotionally drained, making it difficult to immerse ourselves in activities that once captivated us. When emotionally depleted, the brain actually perceives previously rewarding activities differently. Brain imaging studies show diminished activation in pleasure centers when emotionally exhausted individuals engage in formerly enjoyable pursuits. The neurological effort required to sustain attention and experience pleasure becomes too costly for the depleted mind. The dangerous spiral of disconnection. This loss of joy creates a particularly troubling cycle. Activities that once recharged your emotional batteries no longer provide restoration. Without these natural sources of replenishment, your depletion deepens as exhaustion worsens, even more activities lose their appeal. The resulting isolation from pleasurable experiences accelerates emotional burnout. Many people mistakenly interpret this as having outgrown their interests, rather than recognizing it as a symptom of emotional exhaustion. This misinterpretation can lead to abandoning potential sources of healing precisely when they're most needed. Beyond individual activities, relationship impact. This emotional flattening extends beyond hobbies to our most intimate connections. Relationships that once provided comfort and joy may begin to feel like obligations. You might notice conversations with loved ones feeling more draining than energizing. Decreased desire for physical intimacy with partners, reduced empathetic capacity for friends' struggles, a sense of going through the motions in social settings. These relationship changes often trigger guilt, further depleting emotional resources and deepening the cycle of disconnection. Stoic insight. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote in his private journals, "Direct your focus to your inner work, not on external rewards." The Stoics recognized that when we're emotionally exhausted, external pleasures often lose their appeal. Their solution wasn't to force enjoyment, but to retreat inward and reconnect with your deeper values. When activities that once brought joy feel empty, the Stoic approach is to temporarily step back and examine what truly matters to you beyond superficial pleasure. Ask yourself, what values do these activities represent for me? Why did they once bring me joy? For instance, if you've lost interest in cooking, perhaps what you truly valued wasn't just the food, but the creativity, nourishment of others, or mindful focus it provided. By reconnecting with these deeper values, you may gradually rekindle your passion. The third sign of emotional exhaustion is decision fatigue that goes beyond normal indecisiveness. When emotionally depleted, even minor decisions, what to wear, what to eat, which task to tackle first, can feel impossibly difficult. This happens because decision-making requires emotional energy that you simply don't have. I experienced this acutely during my own period of exhaustion. I would stand in the supermarket aisle, completely paralyzed by the choice between two brands of pasta sauce. My mental clarity had become so compromised that I couldn't evaluate even simple options. The cognitive science behind decision paralysis. This phenomenon stems from the limited nature of our mental resources. The prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive functions like decision-making, requires significant glucose and oxygen to operate effectively. When emotionally drained, this region becomes markedly less efficient. Neuroscientists have documented how decision fatigue progressively impairs our cognitive processes. Each decision we make, no matter how small, draws from the same finite pool of resources. Studies show that judges make more lenient decisions early in the day and stricter ones as their mental energy depletes. Similarly, consumers make poorer choices and are more vulnerable to manipulative sales tactics after making numerous decisions. When emotionally exhausted, this natural decision fatigue is amplified to debilitating levels. The brain, sensing its depleted state, treats even minor choices as potentially threatening, triggering anxiety responses that further impair decision-making abilities. The psychological impact of choice overload. Modern life exponentially compounds this problem. We face an estimated 35,000 decisions daily, from digital notifications demanding responses to endless consumer options. For the emotionally exhausted person, this barrage of choices creates a perfect storm. Anticipatory anxiety, dreading decisions before they arise, decision avoidance, postponing choices, creating cascading complications, choice overload, experiencing genuine distress when confronted with options, decision regret, ruminating excessively about past choices, identity erosion, losing confidence in your ability to navigate life effectively. This cognitive burden creates what psychologists call analysis paralysis, a state where the fear of making the wrong choice becomes so overwhelming that no choice feels possible. Stoic insight. Epictetus offers wisdom here as well. If one wishes to be successful, one must learn to distinguish between what one can influence and what one cannot. When your mental resources are overtaxed, your judgment becomes clouded. The Stoic approach helps you gain clarity by dropping things outside your influence. The Stoics practiced a form of prioritization by focusing on what they called preferred indifference, things that might be nice to have but aren't essential to your well-being. When emotionally exhausted, temporarily categorizing minor decisions as indifferent can free up vital mental energy. Try this Stoic practice. For 1 week, limit your non-essential decisions. Wear similar clothes, eat simple meals, and establish basic routines. This decision minimalism creates space for your emotional reserves to regenerate. The fourth sign manifests in how you respond to others: increased irritability, emotional reactivity, or shorter patience. When emotionally exhausted, our capacity to regulate emotions diminishes. Small frustrations that you would normally handle with ease suddenly trigger disproportionate reactions. I noticed this when a minor delay in receiving a package led to an emotional response far beyond what the situation warranted. My emotional regulation systems were compromised by exhaustion. The neurological foundation of emotional dysregulation. This heightened reactivity has clear neurobiological roots. The prefrontal cortex, our brain's executive center responsible for emotional regulation, requires substantial energy to function optimally. When emotionally exhausted, this region experiences reduced blood flow and glucose metabolism. compromising its ability to moderate emotional responses. Meanwhile, the amygdala, our brain's threat detection system, becomes hypersensitive during periods of depletion. Brain imaging studies reveal that emotionally exhausted individuals show exaggerated amygdala activation even to mild stresses. This creates a perfect neurological storm, an overactive emotional alarm system paired with an underpowered regulation center. The result is what neuroscientists call bottom-up emotional processing, reactions that bypass rational thought and emerge directly from primitive brain regions, often with an intensity that surprises even the person experiencing them. The physiological dimension of emotional overreaction. This emotional dysregulation doesn't just affect our mental state. It manifests physically in measurable ways. Accelerated heart rate in response to minor stressors, elevated cortisol levels that remain high throughout the day, increased muscle tension, particularly in the neck, shoulders, and jaw, disrupted sleep patterns that further compromise emotional stability, digestive disturbances triggered by emotional activation. These physiological changes create a feedback loop that further depletes our emotional resources. When our bodies remain in a state of heightened arousal, we exhaust our physical reserves, making emotional regulation increasingly difficult. The interpersonal ripple effects. Perhaps most troubling are the ways this emotional reactivity damages our most important relationships. Trust erosion. When others can't predict our emotional responses, they begin to withdraw, communication breakdown. Productive dialogue becomes impossible when minor disagreements trigger major reactions, interpersonal walking on eggshells. Loved ones begin censoring themselves to avoid triggering responses. Conflict escalation. Small disagreements rapidly intensify as emotional regulation fails. Isolation. As others withdraw from unpredictable interactions, social support diminishes precisely when it's most needed. These interpersonal consequences often trigger shame, which further depletes emotional resources and deepens the cycle of reactivity. Stoic insight. Seneca, advisor to emperors and one of Rome's greatest Stoic teachers, wrote, "It is the power of the mind that protects you, not the condition of the world." The Stoics understood that emotional regulation comes from within. When we're depleted, our protective mental barriers weaken, making us more reactive to external triggers. A Stoic would advise consciously observing your reactions without immediate judgment. This practice, stepping back and watching your emotions as they arise, creates space between stimulus and response. Try this practical exercise. When you feel irritation rising, pause and silently narrate what's happening. "I notice I'm feeling frustrated right now." This small interruption in the emotional circuit helps prevent automatic reactions and preserves your limited emotional energy for what truly matters. The fifth sign of emotional exhaustion is perhaps the most profound, a sense of disconnection, both from yourself and from those around you. This manifests as feeling like you're going through the motions in your own life, observing yourself from a distance. Relationships feel hollow, conversations seem superficial, and meaningful connection feels out of reach. I experience this as a kind of emotional numbness, present physically in gatherings but mentally elsewhere, unable to fully engage or connect. The neuroscience of disconnection. This profound sense of alienation has distinct neurobiological underpinnings. When chronically depleted, the brain's default mode network, responsible for self-reflection, empathy, and social cognition, shows measurably reduced activity. Meanwhile, brain regions associated with survival and threat detection remain hypervigilant, creating a neurological state where connection becomes physiologically difficult. Research on emotional exhaustion reveals decreased activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a region critical for understanding others' mental states and experiencing empathy. This neurological pattern creates what scientists call empathic blunting, a reduced capacity to resonate with others' emotional experiences, further deepening the sense of isolation. The brain, attempting to conserve limited resources, begins to process social interactions as potential threats rather than sources of nourishment. This neurological shift explains why even loving relationships can suddenly feel draining rather than sustaining when emotional exhaustion sets in. The social consequences of disconnection. This internal sense of disconnection inevitably reshapes our external world. Relationship atrophy. Without emotional engagement, intimate relationships gradually wither. Community withdrawal. Social bonds weaken as participation becomes increasingly mechanical. Purpose erosion. Work and contributions lose meaning when disconnected from values. Identity fragmentation. The narrative coherence of life weakens as connection to past and future diminishes. Loss of belongingness. The fundamental human need to belong goes unfulfilled. Perhaps most troubling is how this disconnection creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As we withdraw due to exhaustion, we lose access to the very social resources that could aid our recovery, deepening our isolation and exhaustion further. Stoic insight. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, live in harmony with nature, including your social nature. The Stoics recognized humans as inherently social beings. They understood that feeling isolated goes against our fundamental nature and signals something is deeply wrong with our emotional state. The Stoic solution isn't to force connections when depleted, but to acknowledge this disconnection as a signal that you need restoration. Sometimes the path back to authentic connection requires temporary retreat and self-care. Try this Stoic practice for reconnection. Start with small, meaningful interactions that require minimal emotional output. A brief but present conversation with one person often proves more restorative than large gatherings that drain your limited resources. The path to reconnection. Recovery from this profound disconnection requires a multifaceted approach. Reconnecting with self-gentle self-inquiry practices that restore internal awareness, body-centered approaches that rebuild somatic awareness, values, clarification exercises that re-establish meaningful direction, narrative practices that restore coherence to personal identity, mindfulness techniques that cultivate presence with experience, rebuilding interpersonal connection, low-pressure social interactions with trusted others, vulnerability in small, manageable doses, seeking relationships characterized by acceptance rather than performance, focusing on quality rather than quantity in social engagement, creating space for authentic rather than obligatory connection. Many who've recovered from profound disconnection report that reconnection doesn't happen all at once. Rather, moments of genuine presence and connection gradually multiply, eventually outweighing the experience of alienation. Ask yourself honestly, have you been feeling like an observer in your own life? Have meaningful connections felt increasingly difficult to maintain? This disconnection is perhaps the clearest signal that your emotional reserves need replenishing. By recognizing disconnection as a symptom rather than an existential truth about your life, you open the possibility of restoration and renewal of your most essential connections, to yourself, to others, and to meaning itself. The Stoics understood something profound about human nature, that emotional resilience isn't about never feeling exhausted, but about recognizing the signs and responding wisely. If you've recognized yourself in these 5 signs, feeling overwhelmed by small things, losing interest in once joyful activities, struggling with decisions, becoming more irritable or emotional, feeling disconnected from yourself and others, remember that emotional exhaustion isn't weakness. It's your mind and body communicating an important truth. that you've been carrying too much for too long. The Stoic philosophers would remind us that true strength lies not in pushing through exhaustion, but in acknowledging your limits and honoring them with appropriate action. As Seneca wisely noted, the mind must be given relaxation. It will rise improved and sharper after resting. Take these signs seriously. Give yourself permission to rest, to recover, to reprioritize. Your emotional reserves are precious. Protect them as the Stoics would, with wisdom and care. If you found value in today's exploration, consider subscribing for more ancient wisdom applied to modern challenges. Share your experiences in the comments below. What signs of emotional exhaustion have you noticed, and how have you addressed them? Until next time, remember the Stoic truth that caring for your inner world isn't selfish. It's essential for showing up fully in the outer one. And that's a wrap for today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time.